समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
By this time, all of us have a pretty good idea of what happened in Venezuela. The American raid on Caracas, the quote-unquote arrest of Nicolas Maduro, the president or the dictator of the country, and also his wife, Celia Flores. They were presented Monday morning at the court in New York in front of Judge Alvin Hellerstein, and they will now be read their charges. They will plead not guilty, etc., etc. It seems from whatever I read that even their jury constitution might take at least a year, which means they are now in the jail for a very long time. And as you can see from many of those pictures, Maduro seems to be at least making a brave front. He's giving double thumbs up signs and wishing people happy new year, etc., etc. He's a tough guy or tough dictator, if you want to describe him like that. Now that is one thing, and Donald Trump has carried out this quite incredible operation, because to do this in a sovereign country of sizable dimensions. This is not a tiny country. This is not a tiny banana republic. And because I say banana republic, towards the conclusion, I will also tell you what exactly is a banana republic, because we tend to use that expression rather loosely in our conversations. So this is happening in our country. We become a banana republic. Banana republic has a specific meaning, also pertains to this part of the world to which Venezuela belongs. That is Southern America, Latin America, the Caribbean, Central America, that region in particular, what used to be the banana growing region at one point of time. That said, where is Trump coming from and where is he headed? So one is to listen to his critics. And among his critics, obviously, is the former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who's very familiar with India, along with his former deputy John Feiner. He's written a piece along with the former deputy NSA John Feiner. Given the American tradition, once you go out of power, you go into academia. So both are in academia now. They've written an op-ed for the New York Times where they say, and I quote, "Mr. Trump's appetite for military action seems to grow with the eating." Right? At the same time, I see something from Tom Friedman in the same day's paper. Friedman writes in his typical style, "Grab and go is great if you are doing lunch, but as a geopolitical strategy, it has its limits." That said, he also has a warning. He says, look, if Venezuela gets broken, it belongs to Donald Trump. And he again reminds us of the pottery shop principle. Pottery shop, when you go to a pottery shop, it says things like, in fact, what sticks to my mind for many, many years is lovely to look at, delightful to hold. If you break it, we consider it sold. So he says, follow the pottery shop principle. That means he's done something with Venezuela now. If the country is now broken, that responsibility will lie with Donald Trump. And ultimately, he also goes on to explain that countries where the regime or the ruler is decapitated or leadership is decapitated, they can go two ways. If they are very weak and if their neighbors are weak, if they live in a weak neighborhood, then they can explode, as happened with Syria, as happened with Libya. You took out the leadership, the countries then exploded, which means they sent out millions of refugees outside. Large parts of the country came to be ruled by warlords. There was drug smuggling, narcotics, ISIS came up in those places. Or if they have strong neighbors and also oceans around them, like Yemen, for example, they implode, which means they destruct from within. So will something like that happen to Venezuela? We don't know. But if it happens, then the responsibility would lie with Donald Trump. Is he then going to govern a state of nearly 3 crore people and a country which has already sent out refugees, asylum seekers, numbering up to 8 million people. Up to 8 million Venezuelans are in either other Latin American countries, South American countries, other parts of America. Americas, by the way, is a very large geographic area. It's the entire Western Hemisphere. Americas have 35 sovereign states between North America, that is USA, Canada, Mexico, North America, Central America, the Caribbean, which we know well because the West Indies cricket team comes from there, and Southern America. All of these together are 35 sovereign states. Now, where Trump is coming from, Trump has himself explained. In one of these statements, he loves talking to the press. That's the best thing about him. He loves talking to the press. In one of those statements, he said, Monroe Doctrine, some people also call it the Donroe Doctrine. That is named after himself, Donald Trump. Now, when we saw the national security strategy that his administration issued, which we featured in a full episode of Cut the Clutter, in that policy, one, they reiterated their commitment to the Monroe Doctrine, and then they said there is a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, this is something that I had explained in that Cut the Clutter episode on the national security strategy that Trump administration released. But let me give you a quick recap for understanding. Monroe Doctrine is named after President James Monroe, who came up with the idea in 1823. 1823, early 19th century, was when European countries were, or European powers were coming and colonizing countries in the American continents, that is in the Americas. So the Spanish were coming, the Portuguese were coming, Brazil, for example, the British were coming, the West Indies or the Caribbean. President Monroe then said, this is Monroe. I see many people saying Munro. No, Monroe. President Monroe then said that any further European colonialism or colonization in the Americas is contrary to America's interests. So you will not come and intervene or interfere in the Americas anymore. This is our sphere of influence. यहाँ हमारी दादागिरी चलती है. This is our neighborhood. We rule this neighborhood. Don't come in here without our permission, because we will see that as being contrary to our interests. At the same time, we will not come and interfere in European affairs. In a way, that was the first definition of American isolationism. It keeps coming back. It keeps coming back on the eve of the Second World War. That was in full play. It took the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor to change that, or to shake America out of that isolationism. But President James Monroe defined it first, 1823. What is then the Trump corollary? Trump corollary is that first, we fully accept the Monroe Doctrine and we will enforce the Monroe Doctrine. At the same time, any interference in political affairs of the Americas by outsiders, because now Europeans are not a problem. Europeans are allies of the Americans. It says any interference in political affairs of the Americas by outsiders, that is the Trump corollary. And what does he mean by outsiders? That is Russia and China. And you find this on page 15 of the National Security Strategy. See it on your screen. It says the America will have the right, if such an interference happens, America will have the right, and I quote, to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere, to deny, and I again quote, non-hemispheric competitors. Who would that be? That will be mainly China. And what would they deny? And what would this Trump corollary deny the non-hemispheric competitors? The ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities or own or control strategically vital assets. When you see all that, you know where Trump is coming from, and you can also see what Trump is getting at. Can he handle it? Can he restore order in Venezuela? Can a new government can come into power in Venezuela that looks after Trump's interests or America's interests? At the same time, leaving a jilted China, which has more than $100 billion of debt already stuck in Venezuela? And will this new government then invite American corporations, oil corporations, to start pulling out oil from Venezuela? Venezuela has the largest store of crude oil in the world. the largest. It's a very heavy crude, so it's not easy to refine, but it is the largest storehouse of crude oil in the world. American oil companies are also the biggest in the world. Will the new Venezuelan government now become fully subservient to America? Will the public opinion in Venezuela buy it? Because I also see a lot of comment from experts on Southern America in American media, in other media, saying that Venezuela by this time also has an ideology, and that ideology is called Chavismo. So just as you had Stalinism, Leninism, Maoism, you also have Chavismo in Venezuela. So will they strike back? There are lots of gangs there are lots of warlords, they are very powerful, they have weapons. If they refuse to fall in line, what will America do? Will they then send in their armed forces to restore order in Venezuela? If you do that, then you're back to Iraq and you're back to Afghanistan, where America got caught up in the job of nation building. In the process, it spent too much money, lost too many lives, and both in a way were defeats for the American power. If you see America's power projection or America's belief in Monroe doctrine, it looks like every American president has followed this principle. Trump is not the first one, because Americans have been interfering in the affairs of the Americas for a very long time. You can start any place. I can start you in 1954. That is when the coup took place in Guatemala, and President Eisenhower said, this was a revolution, this was a wonderful thing. There's always been interference by the Americans. 1961 was the big Bay of Pigs fiasco. That is when about 1,500 Cuban exiles were trained by CIA and dropped in Cuba in the hope that the people of Cuba will rise in revolution against Fidel Castro and throw him out, and Cuba will be quote unquote liberated. That completely failed. Cuban armed forces not only stayed loyal but defeated the CIA trained raiders. About 300, some of them were killed, some disappeared here and there, but 1,200 were taken prisoner. A later inquiry report in America, and this was under President Kennedy, right? A later inquiry report in America showed that most of the CIA officers, in fact, none of the CIA officers who were planning this raid knew a word of Spanish. And all these people only spoke Spanish. Spanish is also the language spoken in Cuba. So this was such a ham-handed operation, and that failed. After that, there have been some recent operations as well. 1973, Salvador Allende. He was a left-wing socialist ruler of Chile. Chile used to be a very rich country. It is still a very well-to-do country in Southern America. He was constantly under pressure from American power. Nixon, in fact, a lot of his handwritten notes have now come out. He was saying, do whatever you want, just get him out, because they did not want a leftist leader in their neighborhood. By 1973, there was a coup of sorts against him. His palace was surrounded by a lot of armed people, all helped along by the CIA. Finally, he told everybody with him to surrender and save their lives, whereas he himself supposedly shot himself. There is a lot of mystery about whether he shot himself or somebody shot him. Nevertheless, he died as a consequence of this American operation, once again following the Monroe Doctrine. In fact, when Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, imposed the emergency just a year and a half later, this was one of the reasons her people cited, that foreign powers, in this case American power, wanted to unsettle anti-American regimes or regimes that they saw or governments that they saw as hostile to America. And India under Mrs. Gandhi was very hostile to America. They had just had this big dust-up during the 71 war. And that is why it was to control those forces that she had to impose the emergency. That was the 1973 Salvador Allende episode in Chile. Then more recently, Manuel Noriega, the ruler of Panama, George H.W. Bush, the senior Bush. On 3rd January 1990, George W. Bush, the senior Bush's administration, arrested Manuel Noriega. Just like Trump now, senior Bush also chose sort of end of December, around Christmas time, to move troops into Panama City. He wanted to arrest Manuel Noriega, the ruler of Panama at that point. Noriega escaped in the beginning. He escaped in an unmarked Hyundai car. and he went to the Vatican Embassy, Embassy of the Vatican, or what might be called Embassy of the Holy See, SEE. Holy See, he hid there for some time. The American forces surrounded it. Now you cannot go and storm an embassy, any country's embassy. So they used the weapon of noise and heavy metal. They brought big loudspeakers and endlessly played Guns N' Roses and Black Sabbath around the embassy of the Vatican until Noriega came out and surrendered. That happened in 1990. This was not a bloodless operation in Panama. 23 Americans were killed and 314 Panamanians. 1983, Grenada in the Caribbean was invaded under Ronald Reagan because he suspected that Soviet influence was rising there. So Maurice Bishop, who was the Prime Minister of Grenada, he had just come to America in June that year and also promised that he was going to be a good boy and an ally of the Americans. But in his absence, his deputy, Bernard Couillard, he tried to take over, and then the general, the army chief, took over and declared himself the head of the Revolutionary Military Council. This is when Ronald Reagan decided to invade Grenada. And you know, this is the 50th year of India Today magazine, and there's been much nostalgia. And I also wrote an episode of First Person Second Draft on the 1985-95 decade, the video version of which I shared with you. I will again share a link with you today. It was in that period, in 1983, that this Grenada invasion took place, and India Today had a brilliant headline then. And the headline was Apocalypso Now. Now we know Calypso because we know the West Indies, and we know cricket, and we know Calypso music. That's why this invasion was called Apocalypso Now. The sum total of this is that the Americans have been intervening in their neighborhood forever, particularly since 1823, since the Monroe Doctrine come in, and now it has a Trump corollary as well. Although when Donald Trump came to power, he said he was going to be the president of peace, he was not going to start any new wars, and he also said that he was not going to get America involved in regime change operations. In fact, he said that he would, and I quote from him, stop racing to topple foreign regimes that we know nothing about. Now, that is precisely what he has done. Of course, he will say that this is not a regime I know nothing about. I know a lot about it, but Trump knows something about everybody. It started within about 6 weeks of his inauguration, operations against an ISIS leader or ISIS commander in Iraq on 13th of March. Just 2 days later came the attacks on Yemen. Those were the bombings in Yemen where his NSA lost his job because he had made the mistake of adding to his group on Signal app the editor of Atlantic magazine. That was 15th of March 2025. It went on for some time. On May 6th, Trump said the operations in Yemen are over. So we had about a month's respite until Trump got his fear of missing out, or FOMO, when the Israelis were bombing Iran, and he joined in at the last moment on day 12, and he also bombed a big nuclear facility in Iran in Operation Midnight Hammer, which he says completely decapitated the Iranian enrichment capability, which is something that not too many people in the world are accepting fully. Not even the Israelis are accepting it as of now, it seems. Then we come to Somalia. Somalia strike started. We don't exactly know when they started. They've been ongoing. By now, 114 strikes have been carried out in Somalia, mostly against Al-Shabaab elements, the last of which was carried out on 29th of December, 64 kilometers northeast of Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. Venezuela started in September, when the US started piling up its forces, taking its aircraft carriers and other assets, and also sinking with people on board boats there, which Trump said was carrying drug smugglers. At number 6 comes Syria on 19th of December, where America carried out air raids on supposedly ISIS assets after ISIS terrorists killed 2 American personnel there. Number 7 is Nigeria. Nigeria, 25th of December on Christmas, and I think that was symbolic. Trump carried out air raids on ISIS, on supposed ISIS hideouts in Sokoto state. I'm saying this was probably deliberate and symbolic because before this, Trump had said that Christian community in Nigeria was being victimized and he wasn't going to accept it. and he was going to respond to it. So once again, to round this off, Trump came to power saying he was going to be the president of peace and he wasn't going to bomb other countries. He was not going to carry out regime changes. Within less than 1 year, he's bombed 7 countries and now he's toppled one regime. He's carrying out a regime change, and who knows, tomorrow he gets caught up in nation building as well. And maybe that old Americanism, you ain't seen nothing yet, applies here as well, because Trump has already given warnings to Colombia, to Mexico, and Cuba. Cuba says is falling under its own weight, so doesn't even deserve to be invaded. Colombia has gone on to say that the president himself owns cocaine factories and is smuggling cocaine into the US. So we don't know what's going to happen there. And finally, because I promised you, Banana Republic. From where does the word come? Everybody uses it. So think again of a country whose former president was picked up by the Americans, and this was under Biden administration. They also sent their troops on drug charges. They picked him up. There was a regime change there, so the new government helped the Americans. They picked up the president of Honduras from Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, and brought him to America, where he was convicted in June 2024 and given a 45-year jail sentence. He's just been pardoned by Donald Trump, who said he was only targeted because Biden administration did not like his government. Now, Honduras is where O. Henry, the famous American writer, I don't know how many of us would be familiar with his name now. I don't know how many of us will be familiar with his name now, but O. Henry was a great writer of the early 20th century. He spent quite a bit of time in Honduras in exile and hiding away from some charges of bank fraud or something like that in America. While he was in Honduras, he wrote a book called Cabbages and Kings. Please see the book, the original title, Cabbages and Kings, where he had imagined a country called Republic of Anchuria. Republic of Anchuria is what he described as a banana republic. What's a banana republic? It's a country which is run by state capitalism, which means government controls the economy. It's also a country which has a dictatorship. It's also a country where dictators are thieves. So it's a plutocracy and the working class is very poor. But most importantly, it's a country which has a single export or single source of income for its economy, and usually a very low value export like bananas, because at that point, bananas were Honduras's only export. O. Henry described his imagined Republic of Anchuria, which was a proxy for Honduras, as a banana republic. And that expression has stayed since then, immortalized. But as you can see in your usage, more misused than used aptly. That's the reason I thought this was a good opportunity for me to explain this to you.